Okay, thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the October 17th, 2019 Planning Board meeting. We have a quorum this evening. Thank you all for coming. Our agenda this evening is first up, Landrock LLC, public hearing. Second up is Lighthouse Landing Communities LLC, Phase 1 amended site plan approval. And then a presentation by Jonathan Villani on the 30 Andrews Lane proposed townhouse development. The first agenda item is listed as a final subdivision plat, but in fact, we've come to realize that that discussion is premature in that there are endorsements and documents that have not yet been received by the village. So we can open the public hearing, but we really need to have the other documents arrive before we can move to final.
Do you want to open the public hearing?
Excuse me?
Would you please open the public hearing? Good evening.
Yes.
Yeah, William Null with the firm of Cuddy and Fader, and Mark Shogren with Divney Tung Schwabi is here with me as well. Do you have the board?
So we open the public hearing for Landrock LLC.
So I just wanted to address your comment, Madam Chair. We've been asking for the signed resolution since September, slightly after September 19th.
Mm-hmm.
And without that signed resolution, we could not go to the county health department to get input on the water main that we agreed to loop. So we submitted the application in the hope that we would get from you the signed resolution. With due respect, we asked that it be delivered to us signed so that we can commence the work, because we're sort of between a rock and a hard place here.
Yep.
You're asking us to do something that we can't do without your help, and you're not helping us. I know you've been helpful in scheduling the special meeting, and we're looking to cooperate, but we need that signed resolution in order to be able to go to county health. We did submit plans, a draft final plat that we believe addressed the comments that were requested or require the conditions that were required under the preliminary subdivision approval. The notation with regard to the status of Gorybrook Road, I proposed in my letter to this board language that clearly would say that the ownership of the underlying fee of Gorybrook Road, that portion shown on this subdivision plat, is not determinative of the use of that roadway. And I think that that's a fair statement of our discussion of the preliminary plat hearing before you adopted that resolution. I had a discussion with Mr. Smith, Clinton Smith, earlier today, and I don't know what the current status is of what the board is asking. Perhaps you can help me with that.
There were 2 points on the preliminary plat resolution that we've gone back and forth on, number 4 and number 7, right? Clinton, can you help us
Yes.
read the latest version of the resolution?
Yes, ma'am. Number 4.
Do you have a copy of the latest version? Or is that it's what you sent me last week?
It is, that's correct for number 4. Number 4 now reads, "A note shall be placed on the plat describing the current status of Gorybrook Road." Number 7 how does your number 7 begin?
The owner of any property.
All right. Number 7 now reads, "If Gorybrook Road is used for other than emergency purposes or other than on an incidental basis for access to or from any property covered by this subdivision, the owner of that property will improve it to village standards." That is that is the way it was adopted here at the last meeting.
Correct. And is that the version that we will get signed by this
Yes.
planning board tomorrow? So it can be filed and start the statute of limitations, and we can bring it to the county health department?
I have it right here, and you may be able to get it signed tonight.
That would be much appreciated, so that we can start moving forward with the next steps. We showed the extension of the water main as we had proposed down the driveway of Landrock's property into the north. Of course, we'll need the village's cooperation with us to obtain that next piece into New York State Park to connect to the 12-inch public main that's to the north.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't necessarily do it without village's cooperation, so we're hoping that the village will cooperate with us on that, since it is a public benefit that we're producing. I saw Mr. Natarelli's memorandum that he was asking for Landrock to grant an easement south. I don't understand why that would be granted or asked for. Could you help me understand what you're asking for? No, the board, actually. If the board, is the board asking for that?
Can you read the request, Mr. Natarelli?
The comment reads, and this is from my October 11th memo. I'm sorry. It is recommended that easement D for village water and sanitary sewer be extended on the subject property for the entire length of Gory Brook Road.
As you know, we only own a section of Gory Brook Road.
I'm sorry, I need to clarify that. You're absolutely right. On the subject property is the only place that I'm talking about where I'm recommending that the easement be granted at this time.
And what is the reason for that? We had asked the village if it would agree to undertake connecting Ridge Street north, and saying that we would then bring our connection down so that we could all connect to the north. And I thought it was the consensus of the planning board that that was not something you wanted to pursue. So why should we be in a position of granting an easement south?
The reason for the easement, I think, is because the village needs to use that road to maintain the public works.
We can grant an access easement, that's not a problem. If you believe you need an access easement,
I don't.
I'm fine
Would
granting
be
an
good.
access easement, because we own the land, as you know. There's no question that we own the land based on the analysis that we did. So you're asking for an access easement for maintenance, and we're fine on granting an access easement for maintenance.
Could you clarify for us is there additional requirements for that easement, James?
Well, my comment didn't have to do with any access easement for the village, and that's a separate matter that this comment wasn't meant to address. This comment is for, not that there are any current plans that the village may have to extend the water main from where it now ends on Gory Brook Road up to this property, but in the event that the village would like to do that in the future, I think now is a good opportunity, when a map gets filed with land records, to have that already done and in place, just to make it easier in the future.
And, if we can agree on what other conditions the planning board wants, perhaps we can agree on that one. But at this point, we don't understand why we should be compelled to do that. It's not necessary for the public improvements that we're providing. Are there other issues? With regard to that note on the final plat, can we have a discussion about that? Was the language that I proposed acceptable to you with regard to that note on the final plat?
I believe that excuse me, in the conversation that I had today, which the chair was a participant, the language that we now have for note 4 is the preferred language.
Are we talking about the preliminary subdivision approval resolution? Are we talking about, or are we talking about what note we need to put on the final plat? Because,
I believe for both.
so, just so I'm clear, I think that the preliminary, note 4, just says, a note shall be placed on the plat describing the current status of Gory Brook Road.
That's correct.
So
You're
what
right.
is that note, the note that I proposed in my letter? I'm asking if that's an acceptable note.
And I believe that the general feeling was that the original language that said.
I don't know what the original language was
I'll have
because
to look and see it. One
board,
moment.
Mr. Knoll, can you just read your statement that you're asking us to comment on?
sure, be happy to. This is my October 3rd letter. Ownership by Landrock LLC of the underlying fee to the bed of Gory Brook Road, as shown on the subdivision plat, is not determinative of any right to use of the roadbed. So the concept was to keep that issue open, to not make a definitive statement one way or the other, and frankly, to have a situation where a title company will ensure title to property owners who we hope will buy and build homes on this site.
And the note 4, as it had originally been prepared by me, said, a note shall be placed on the plat delineating Gory Brook Road as a public right-of-way.
And as you know, I objected to that, and when you voted, we agreed to this more qualified language, leaving open what we would be discussing with regard to the note on the actual final plat, which brings us to where we are tonight.
Yeah, my understanding from the conversation that was had last time, and others can weigh in if they too agree or not, was that I thought we were all on the same page here, both the village and your applicant, as to the current use of it, which is pedestrian, open to pedestrian, horse, other non-vehicle traffic, was
So-
okay?
So,
Is
let me
that
just
correct?
show you, I only have
Okay.
one.
It's okay, we can
one
share.
copy, but as you can see, there's a sign right now that says it's private property, and it says that this is property of Green Rock, and it asserts certain limitations on what could be used. And as you know, for over 100 years, the Rockefeller family has let the public walk on their private lands. And I think I'm very comfortable saying that that permissive use in no way means that it's all public right-of-way. So the fact that people are walking on the property doesn't mean that it's a public right-of-way. And so we're all in agreement that people walk on the land, but I don't think that takes us to the point of saying that a note should be put on the plat saying it's a public right-of-way, which I think we were all clear I objected to,
Right,
and I think Mr. Steinmetz very clearly objected to as well
right.
when we were here, even though we talked about people using it.
I guess my understanding is the village, and correct me, Clinton, if I'm saying this falsely, is just preserving that right, and hence if the village sees it as they have a right of way, I think they're talking more of that use is that correct?
It is speaking of that, but it's going back to a fundamental point that Gory Brook Road was a road. It was a road, and a road is committed to the use of the public by foot, by horse and buggy, by vehicles, be it bicycles or motorcycles or cars. And somewhere along the line, it was abandoned. A gate was put up. It ceased being maintained by the village. But that abandonment does not constitute a ceasing and abandoning of its use by pedestrians who do use it.
Well, actually, the pedestrian use is permissive, as that sign indicates, and the road has been maintained privately by the owners adjacent. The village hasn't paid money to maintain that road, whether it's leveling it out or maintaining the drainage or clearing trees that fall or anything like that. That's all been privately done. So as I said, the fact that people walk on the Rockefeller property, some of which now is state park, but a lot of which is not, including Landrock and the Leidens property, doesn't make it a public road. And the fact that it's called Gorybrook Road doesn't make it a public road. There are private roads that have names on maps as well. So there's nothing clearly indicating, limiting myself to the Landrock parcel, there's nothing clearly indicating that the Landrock parcel's ownership of the piece of Gorybrook Road at any point was public. There's nothing that I've seen, and certainly with due respect to this board, I don't believe that you have the adjudicatory authority to be able to compel us to say that lands that we privately own are public right-of-ways, because you could open it for car use, and you're not maintaining it, and you could do any number of things to it, and that suggestion that we have no control over what you do with it is not something we're willing to concede tonight. And I frankly don't see how it affects any public health, safety, or welfare issue associated with developing 3 homes on 35 acres. I think it's a significant reach for the village to ask us to put that note on the plan, and we're not consenting to that.
Yeah, I think the tone of the discussion in September is shifted in this month, in that you're being much more direct now than you were last month, Mr. Null. This is my perception. I came away from last month's meeting feeling that we all wanted to preserve the character of our village and the enjoyment of open space. I'm getting messages from not just Sleepy Hollow, but, neighboring towns as far as, the general public enjoyment of that vista. And to your point, maybe it's permissive or whatever, but I left the discussion thinking that we didn't necessarily want to document something one way or the other, but there was an interest in preserving the character of that Gorybrook Road.
We're not looking to change the character of Gorybrook Road. We're looking to have a note on it that maintains the status quo. But you're asking us to change that status quo and to determine that effectively we've dedicated that roadway to public use, which would give it fully to the village to decide what it wants to do, including putting motor vehicles on it. And we're not willing to do that. I don't think it's a fair thing to ask of us. And I, with due respect, disagree that I've changed my position. We've said we're willing to put a note on that preserves the status quo. And what I put in my letter of October 3rd, 2 weeks or so after the meeting, was language that said just that. This board, in the discussion that we had, I thought was willing to accept something that just preserved the status quo. And what you're asking of us tonight is truly a shift in asking us to say that it's a public right-of-way. That's not something that we when I left the meeting, I thought this board was going to insist upon.
Yeah, so number 4 states that a note shall be placed on the plat describing the current status of Gorybrook Road, which is the attempt to maintain the status quo. Now, how you describe that in a legal document, I can't opine on. But the sentence that you did read, is that reflected anywhere in our correspondence?
It's in my letter to you dated October 3rd. I did not see it in any memorandum or otherwise.
And that would be substituted for number 4.
So, Mr. Smith, can you clarify for us the nuance between our statement of number 4 and Mr. Null's proposed language?
I think the fundamental point is Mr. Knoll does not like the use of public right-of-way or right-of-way. Is that correct?
That's clear.
Well, you, in your description, indicated that the road was abandoned for vehicular use. A public right-of-way is an unrestricted right-of-way. And I, with due respect, don't know what information the board has to say that Landrock's section of Gorybrook Road was a public right-of-way or is a public right-of-way. There's been permissive use of that land by the Rockefeller family for decades, if not almost a century or more.
And there was use of that road before the Rockefellers bought the property. The road existed, and we have to face that fact.
It doesn't say that it was a public right-of-way,
That's
though the
true.
road may have existed. It may have been a private
It might have been a
right-of-way.
private road
And
that was maintained by the village and thus fell into village. We may argue this point, but I'll go back to the question I asked you before. Is your problem the use of the phrase public right-of-way?
yes,
All right, so that's where we differ. Mr. Knoll doesn't like the use of public right-of-way. I like it, I think it's accurate. I don't have any disagreement with his language. His language doesn't, arguably public right-of-way does define what the village thinks it is. Mr. Knoll doesn't want to do that, so he flips it and says that it's not determinative. I don't have any problem with that. That's a question of what you want to do in terms of the phrasing you want to use. Pure and simple. And it's the question of whether or not it is a public right-of-way. Whether or not Gorybrook Road is a public right-of-way. Perhaps it was abandoned to vehicles. We can add as a public right-of-way, except as regards to motorized vehicles. That's a question of however you want to deal with it.
Well, right now, the two statements, number 4 and number 7, are in conflict, right? Because if we're saying it's abandoned to vehicular traffic, point number 7 is also saying we're going to allow, emergency vehicles, which is obviously vehicular. So what we're trying to do is, for perpetuity, clarify to the greatest extent possible now, so that some future planning board and applicant don't have to grapple with uncertainty.
we're not willing to consent to calling this a public right-of-way on a note on the subdivision plat. And I don't think there's a need, with due respect, for the planning board to reach that point to address the public health, safety, and welfare issues associated with developing 3 homes on this lot. What we've proposed is language that doesn't assert. Let me back up. This discussion began when you asked, quite rightly, why it is that we extended the property line to the other side of Gorybrook Road, where one of the plans that we had showed Gorybrook Road as a separate strip, essentially. And my answer to you was that we owned the underlying fee, and there's title documentation that indicates that. So the question then arose, well, what do we do about making sure that it's not asserted that you own you own and control the full length, or at least the piece on Landrock's property, and we propose this note to address your concern. What you're doing, though, is pushing it that much further and saying that we have no right to do anything on that road. And I don't think that's necessary nor with due respect appropriate in this instance.
Two little questions. This Landrock property in the beginning here, where does that bill end by the aqueduct? How close to the aqueduct? Because you got the aqueduct, the road, and
so-
your property.
So this is actually the Leiden's property?
Yeah, the light,
Not
the beginning,
Landrock's?
well, the beginning.
Just,
All right,
so,
then,
so,
start there.
okay, so,
There's the aqueduct where you go in, right?
so, no, the aqueduct is actually over here.
Right.
Where you could go in, or you could go in, frankly, from prior, I'm looking at a picture, just for the record.
Yeah,
I'm looking at a picture of the stop sign and the chain at the, just north of the Leiden's driveway.
right.
Mhm.
And then I'm looking back from inside Gorybrook Road, back at the back of the sign, the back of the stop sign, and the chain. And you're asking me where
Yeah.
where
Does it go on the
the
other,
walkway down
to the aqueduct? Yeah.
There is a separate walkway down to the aqueduct. That's shown clearly on this picture,
You're right.
okay?
Exactly.
And that's just
So here's the
beyond
aqueduct, that's
the
what I'm
right
saying. How far is your property from
From the
that?
aqueduct?
Yeah,
I would say it's 25 feet or so, something like that. And there's a direct path from the paved portion of Gorybrook Road, sorry. There's a direct path from the paved portion of Gorybrook Road
Hmm.
to the aqueduct without needing to go on Gorybrook Road. And then there's a direct path from the aqueduct back onto Gorybrook Road, I think around a little bit north into Landrock property or just after Landrock property. Around where, over here, the north part, where we're coming back up to connect to the 12-inch water main. So there's a way for the public to go north, essentially parallel to Gorybrook Road, and to get into the park without needing to be on Gorybrook Road.
so you're saying this Gorybrook Road, if this is your property now, that shows on our maps, it goes all the way up to 117.
So,
So that's where I'm getting like,
right, so the only section that this plat concerns is the area here to here. And that piece is on this site right here. So I'm looking at the area map in the upper right corner of the subdivision plat. And the Gorybrook Road chain is right about here, just above block 8079, which is the, I'm sorry, just above block 8082 here. It's right around this line. And at that point, you can see the Croton Aqueduct parallels directly. But I'm not talking about, I'm talking about underlying ownership of the property itself. And that was the reason that we extended the line to this side, because there is ownership of this property. In fact, that's why the property owners have been maintaining it, and the village hasn't been maintaining it.
well, my only concern is if you open that up to any kind of traffic, or so-called emergency or whatever you're using it for, it can go on forever. Who's gonna
What do you mean by run forever?
well, you can drive all the way up that road.
Only anyone could drive up that road if it's a public right-of-way. I mean,
No, but-
what you're proposing as a public right-of-way would mean that anybody could drive up that road.
No, I don't want that. I would leave the chain the way it is.
But
I
the
mean,
chain-
if we do open it up, I'm saying you could,
With
who's
due
going to
respect,
regulate the driving?
Our client has a key to that chain, so I believe the Leidens have a key to that chain. And, yeah, Michael, come on. Michael Roberts.
I'm Michael
I
Rockefeller.
know.
So you have to understand Gorybrook Road was built for the Croton Aqueduct. So
what?
it was built
Yeah,
as an access route to build the Croton Aqueduct. So if you know where the Pecanico River comes and the Croton Aqueduct crosses it, it's a gigantic structure. It took a long time and a lot of work to build that. So they had a camp of workers there. And they built Gorbrook Road in the 1840s to access that spot, to build that part of the Croton Aqueduct. So eventually it became used not by the company that built the Croton Aqueduct, but by the public. And time marched on. Eventually, in about the 50s, the road was cut off. What happened was that the section that the Leiden Zone, the section that Landrock owns, and then a section that my Uncle David had an ownership to, extended and was improved until you got to the turnoff to the Croton Aqueduct. After that, until all the way about what you're talking about at 117, is completely abandoned. And my son and I actually just walked it this weekend. It's very, very difficult to walk. You can do it, but there is a very narrow path. It's about a foot wide, and there are trees that have fallen in the route. So there's no way that any car could have access to that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Well, that's all I'm concerned. I mean, opening up that gate, if people, everybody walks on there now, right? There's walkers and joggers and horseback riding. You just don't want people just to, you know, kids just drive up Gorbrook Road and just keep on going up
No,
to,
absolutely not. That would be a disaster,
We have
because they
no-
would get access to the entire park system.
that's my only concern.
We have no interest in opening it up in that way. When I'd mentioned that one of the lots may use it as alternate driveway access, we were only talking about that one lot having access. And the concept then was that there'd be some control gate at that point, not that it would be wide open. And as I'd said, that's not part of this application. If that were to be presented, that would be part of a site plan application, and we'd have different discussions and different issues to address of concern, including what Mr. McCarthy had asked, which is wherever the gate may be located, the concern is backing out if you came up to it and its location and all sorts of things.
I think, Mr. Steinmetz, you had a comment also?
If I can address it? Would you prefer that I do it here or there? Happy to do it here.
Either
I don't want to take Bill's mic away from him. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. David Steinmetz from the law firm of Zarin and Steinmetz here, once again representing Carol and John Leiden. I want to start by saying my clients have no objection to the three-lot subdivision. We told you that last time. We remain steadfast in that position. However, having witnessed what I did this evening, both in the work session, which, Bill, you didn't get all of, and I have some things that I'm going to make sure you know they said, and what happened in the public session, I feel like your board has made quite a clear record that there's a lack of clarity on this. I think there's absolutely a lack of clarity on whether you know what you granted in terms of preliminary subdivision, and I think you articulated that quite well earlier. I also want to just give you my position, because you were asking for legal opinions earlier. If there is a preliminary plat resolution that you may have thought you voted on, but you continued negotiating it over the last month, your counsel is still editing it today, and I learned when I got here this evening that it wasn't signed or filed, therefore nobody could ever have challenged it. I don't really think you have preliminary approval, and in light of your work session discussion, clear it up, because your discussion this evening has made me concerned that there really is a lack of clarity. So I just want to give you the neighboring property owner's position. I stood up at the last meeting and objected to the condition for public right-of-way, largely because of its connection to the language in Condition 7. Condition 7 talked about improving Gorybrook Road and who might or might not improve it. Our concern, and I think I share the board's concern, we don't want to see Gorybrook Road improved. We think, as the chair indicated before Mr. Noah got here, you wanted to eliminate the vagaries and eliminate the incidental access, including eliminating emergency access. Now, I don't know if that's the board's position, but as a member, representing a member of the public and a neighbor, We simply want to know what the board's position is. So I'm asking you, on behalf of the Lydens, clarify what is the status of Gory Brook Road in the village's position? To the extent that you want to see, and I heard this very clearly articulated in the work session, the public should be able to walk on it. People should be able to jog on it. Horses and carriages should be able to traverse it. Bicycles should be on it. I want you to know my clients have absolutely no objection to any of that. And if there is a question about the ability to do that, my clients are prepared to grant an easement in favor of the public to do all of those things. We share Landrock's position, and I think the village engineer and village building inspector's position, that at the moment cars should not be on that road. So when I hear the phrase from the village attorney that it's a public right-of-way, I share Mr. Knoll's concern, because we don't want cars on that road. I don't think the board does, but at the moment, my position, not the applicant's attorney, my position, your record is a mess. And I don't think you've made it clear in your preliminary plat draft, and that's all it is a draft, what your intent is. So my suggestion is clarify your preliminary plat approval. You haven't granted it yet. Haven't
Yes, they
signed
have.
it.
They've
I know there was a vote, but I also know I listened to what this board said for 20 minutes before you walked in the room, and it caused me great concern, because the comment was, it's been a moving target. It's not clear what Mr. McCarthy said, it's not clear what your board has done. So if the village officials aren't clear on what you've done, and you haven't signed something, and the public doesn't understand what you've done, just do it again clearly. You're not granting final plat approval tonight anyway, for the reasons that Mr. Natarelli has articulated. Again, Bill, I'm not trying to impede your ability to get your three-lot subdivision approved. We wish you only the best. But tonight, I want to make it totally clear. We have no idea what you're doing on Gory Brook Road. We want to know what you're doing on Gory Brook Road. We want to know if there are gates or no gates. We want to know if there are improvements or no improvements. We want to know if the public can walk on it and if horses can traverse it. And until we know that, I don't think your board should be granting final plat approval for sure. And again, I don't think you've granted preliminary plat approval, despite what Mr. Knoll may disagree with me on. My last comment, site plan application. I'm out too many nights a week in too many municipalities like my friend Bill Null. Every community does things a little differently. You appear to be talking about site plan approval. Your resolution of preliminary plat approval references an application for site plan approval, but I don't think you're really granting site plan approval. But again, I'm not clear. Tonight I heard Mr. Null say, and I know it's his position, he will come back in the future with regard to site plans. Well, I would ask this board, if you're granting subdivision approval, and it's all about Gory Brook Road, and your concerns about emergency access and concerns about vehicles, you ought to know what the intentions are with regard to Gory Brook Road, because we have perceived somewhat inconsistent intentions, and we simply want to know what our neighbor is going to be doing and what you're permitting our neighbor to do. In closing, my clients have no objection to the 3 lots being created. My clients have no objection to the public traversing Gory Brook Road. We don't want cars on it, and we don't want it improved. And I strongly object to condition 7, even as it's been tweaked by Clinton and Bill, and they've both been kind enough over the last 30 days to let me comment. I don't know what incidental use is. Incidental is usually incident to something else. It doesn't usually mean temporal. So I had suggested we try to define it, and I added the word infrequent. I heard you tonight make some great comments. Sean said, what's infrequent to lot 1 may not be infrequent to lot 3. Then I heard your board say you really don't want anybody improving it. So if you don't want anybody improving it, then why did Clinton draft condition 7, making Landrock improve it? You're all over the place. I urge you to take a step back, clean it up, let's all know what you're doing and do it correctly. Happy to answer questions and happy to elaborate further. I hope my point is clear.
Thank you.
May I address that, please?
Certainly.
We had a considerable amount of discussion September 19th about those two conditions, and we modified the language in Note 7. Mr. Steinmetz participated in that modification. We all agreed that that modification was acceptable, and this board adopted by a vote a preliminary subdivision approval resolution. The resolution that Mr. Smith is talking about is the exact language that was approved that night. There's no lack of clarity in that whatsoever. We're asking, and as we asked earlier tonight, that that resolution be delivered to us, signed, as that is indeed what we need in order to move forward so that we can do a final plat. Now, condition 4, that merely said, a note shall be placed on the plat describing the current status of Gorybrook Road, is a condition that we've already had some discussion on. I don't think there's a lack of clarity with regard to that. Whether or not you want condition 7 to continue with the final plat or not, you're not granting final plat approval tonight.
Correct.
But with due respect, I don't agree with Mr. Steinmetz that you can unravel a vote that you took and change language in a resolution that you adopted, and have us all pretend that that meeting and that adoption didn't take place. I'm not looking to push you against the wall in any way at all. This language is language that we discussed at length, and this language is language that, particularly if with due respect, we go with the language that I have in my letter with regard to the status of Gorybrook Road, doesn't commit anyone to make any change to Gorybrook Road. And as you know, we've made no proposal to make any improvements to Gorybrook Road, and we've stated repeatedly that we're looking to keep it in its bucolic natural state. We're not looking to widen it. We're not looking to do anything with it. And it was the language in your condition 7 that suggested that it was going to be used more, it would need to be improved, and the discussion was to driveway standards. It wasn't to public road standards, because we had that as part of the discussion as well, and I know that was very clear. Nobody wanted to widen it to 28 or 30 feet and put in pavement and curbs and all the rest that likely would be involved in a public roadway. We're not looking to have public traffic on it, but we're also not looking to be prohibited. There's already motor vehicle traffic on that road to access Landrock's property. There's no way that it makes any sense to prohibit that. We're not talking about considerable traffic at all. We were talking, when we spoke about it, about one house. We were also talking about emergency access, and I understand if you don't want it to be labeled as emergency access because of the 12% slope of the driveway, that's a little bit serpentine there, fine. That's not a problem for us. We don't need that for the subdivision to conform to village standards and be approvable. The maintenance of the road is something that our client and I believe the Lydens do as may be necessary. We're not asking the village to maintain it. We're not asking to change it. But I don't think putting a condition in that prohibits motor vehicles on that road and thereby changes the status quo, because there are trucks that go down and maintain it, and there are trucks that go down to get to Landrock's property, or vehicles, cars at sometimes that go down there. We're not looking to increase traffic in any meaningful sense at all, or to allow the public in to drive their cars.
So I think we are aligned in that we want to preserve the use of Gorybrook Road for pedestrian, cycling, or horses, and to, our preference is actually to eliminate vehicular traffic and to,
Cycling is not permitted, actually, by the Green Rock sign,
okay.
just for whatever.
Take out
that's worth.
cycling, okay.
Sorry. Just-
So hence, this is the back and forth that we've had with Clinton and you and everybody, because there is a fundamental conflict between the way point 4 is stated and the way point 7 is stated. So we discussed eliminating point 7, but because it had been approved in the September meeting, we felt that it had to be included. So the question is whether we can approve this preliminarily, but then in the final resolution for the final subdivision plat, go back and clean it up so that there are no inconsistencies between any of the points in the resolution.
So,
That is our intention.
so does that mean the preliminary plat resolution will be finalized as it was approved and drafted?
No, I believe what the chair was saying is the preliminary plat resolution has been approved. I prepared it as it was approved. That's done. The chair was saying then, assuming note 4 is resolved, either it's a public right-of-way or as you phrased it, it's not determinative, then note 7 would be eliminated.
What I understand is that the final plat needs to substantially conform to the preliminary plat that's approved. It doesn't mean it needs to be identical to. So we can talk about that. I don't have a need for that road to be designated for emergency purposes, but I do have a need for it not to prohibit motor vehicles from our site being able to use that road. They're now able to use that road. And if your intention is to prohibit those cars, that would be problematic for me. One other thing I'd just like to say, if I may.
Can you clarify the current and intended vehicular access? Why does it need to be maintained as opposed to the official driveway on Weber Ave?
Well, the official driveway and the main driveway to the sites will be Weber Avenue. That's the way we're approving it. But occasional use of that driveway is the way it's been for decades, and we're not prepared to eliminate that. In fact, I spoke to you probably 3 or 4 months ago about how one of the lots would have it as an alternative access, but the other 2 would not. And I didn't hear at that time, and it doesn't mean that you're bound by it, but I didn't hear at that time any objection to one of the lots being able to gain access or enter or leave that way if they chose to. Not that that would be their principal means of access. The principal means of access is Weber Avenue. The only other thing I wanted to say is that Lot 1 did receive site plan approval. That's why it's referred to in the resolution as having occurred prior to these 2 lots. That's why the utility infrastructure in part is in there to serve that 1 lot. And as you know, the planning board requires site plan approval for each lot, even though you have subdivision approval first. I built a home in Sleepy Hollow. I'm on the other side of Sleepy Hollow Road, between Bedford and Sleepy Hollow, and I needed to come for site plan approval, even though I bought a lot that was subdivided by David Rockefeller. So I know the process, and there's no inconsistency. So when I referred to if there was going to be some sort of a gate proposed or something, it would be in a site plan approval. That's not inconsistent with the documentation that you've seen. We're not proposing it now, but I didn't want to be anything but forthcoming on what might be possible. And we can talk about that. That's not inconsistent with the preliminary subdivision approval that was granted last meeting, and that we're talking about how it affects the final subdivision plan.
So we have at least 3 attorneys in the room. There may be others that I'm not aware of, but I don't think I have a clear understanding of the rules as to whether the preliminary subdivision resolution needs to be consistent with the final subdivision resolution and then the plats, so that if we wanted to substantially eliminate .7, how do we do that?
Well, would you agree to eliminate a .7 if we have in .4, either it's a public right-of-way or it's
indeterminate?
Indeterminate?
Not if it's a public right-of-way, no. But
Okay.
no, I mean, we've had that discussion.
But
But
if
I-
it's indeterminate, would you agree to eliminate it?
I have no problem with, if 7 is eliminated as a burden to our client or other users of that property in the future, I don't have a problem with that. My understanding of the law is that the final plat needs to be substantially conforming to the preliminary plat. They don't need to be identical. They need to be substantially conforming. And I don't have a problem with 7
Well, how do you
being eliminated.
define substantially as, like,
Well, in other words, there could be some changes to the final plat. It doesn't need to be exactly the same. So in that same sense, if 7 were eliminated, I'd be fine. My only concern is, since we're all having a candid, open discussion, is I want to make sure that your thoughts on eliminating that don't also carry with them elimination of motor vehicle traffic as it now occurs servicing the Land Rock property. So if your thought is by eliminating 7 that our client won't be able to drive a car or a truck to get to Land Rock on Gory Brook Road, we can't agree to that because we've presented to you that there'd be incidental use of that road. And I thought that was understood when you approved the preliminary subdivision.
I have one other comment. This is something we also discussed up front, but I think you said it several times. Initially, when we talked, it was about that one property potentially using it incidentally. The way it's actually worded says any property. So that was a big difference for me from what we did discuss at length. So I think something has to change with that 0.7 at a minimum for those
I'm
reasons.
fine eliminating it as long as what I just said is not the implication to you of eliminating it, and we don't come up with a condition in the final plat that prohibits motor vehicle use.
so we're in agreement that eliminating emergency vehicle use of Gory Brook Road is acceptable.
With due respect, I'd rather state it a different way. We're not going to identify it as emergency access, but I think if emergency vehicles need to get to a site, I mean, they could drive across my lawn, they could drive anywhere they need to. If they need to get to a site, we don't want to prohibit them from getting to the site. I don't know that it would be meaningful legally or otherwise, but we're fine eliminating an emergency access easement or reference on the final plat.
Okay. And then the intention for that one lot to use it as an alternate driveway, why is that attractive versus using the official Weber?
Because we know from market analysis and input from interested purchasers that that is important. And we have a right to use the road. I don't understand why, from this board's perspective, that would be something that would be unsafe, inappropriate. It's being used that way now, back and forth on occasion.
But
We're not-
it's not to the standards of the village for a driveway or a road.
Right. but
So
it
just
is-
because it hasn't happened, just because there has been no mishap up to this point, doesn't mean that we should necessarily continue to use it if it's not to the village standard.
It's private property. It's being used for a number of purposes. We're not looking to have it be used as a regular access point for anything. We're just looking not to have the village strip us of the right to use that which has been used already. And we're willing to limit it to access only for Lot 3 for occasional driveway access.
Mr.
Which is what we
Steinmetz?
said to you in our transmittal probably 3 or 4 months ago.
Sounds like like Clinton Smith is taking the position that you did grant preliminary approval. If you granted preliminary approval by your voice vote last month, then you did it with the notion under 7 that there would be improvements to Gory Brook Road, because you mandated that if there's occasional or incidental use, somebody's got to improve it. So I guess
No, it doesn't say that, David.
So So my question continues to be, under what circumstance is this board telling the applicant that they are required to improve it? We agree that they shouldn't improve it. And your question earlier about what can you do about changing the resolution, even if you believe, and I disagree, but even if you believe that you've granted preliminary approval, there's no reason you can't amend it. So there's been a comment tonight about the inconsistency about all 3 lots or just Lot 3. We've heard previously that it would just be Lot 3. Amend your preliminary resolution and make it clear. But most importantly, we're also now hearing that there's going to be some kind of continued vehicular use. All I can tell you, I've been there, I don't live here, so I'm going to just tell you what my clients say. My clients indicate to me that there is not vehicular use on Gory Brook Road north of the chain. That's simply the Leiden's position. I assume your village officials, and many of you, probably have more than anecdotal knowledge of this, but I defer to others in the room who know more. My clients take the position that vehicles don't use it, shouldn't use it. I've heard your village building inspector and village architect take the position it may not be the safest road for vehicles to be on, so I defer to you before you make a final decision on how you're going to address it. If, however, it's going to be used for occasional, incidental, infrequent vehicular use for Lot 3, is the chain going to stay where it is? Is it just going to be picked up when somebody drives through? Or, more likely, is there going to be some kind of gate or structure? If there is, you have every right to know where it's going to be and how it's going to be operated. My clients would like to know that. Again, we have no objection to the public going through there, but you're creating an inconsistent record again. Do you want the public going through there, or do you want them to create a barricade there? So we're simply asking for some information that we haven't been able to get. You're our only means to get it, and we're hoping you will help elicit that. If your goal is, quote, to keep it in a bucolic state. Keeping it in a bucolic state is diametrically inconsistent with the language you allegedly approved in Condition 7. Amend the preliminary plat approval, take a step back, do this thing correctly. You've been at it for a long time. It's a shame it's taken this long. I'd love to see them get their 3 lots, but do it the right way.
With due respect, Condition 7 does not say that there can be no use of Gory Brook Road. It says if it's other than incidental use or other than emergency use. That was what the language was. So it contemplated incidental use, because that is what we were describing with Lot 3 occasionally using it.
So the planning board does not want Gory Brook Road improved. We want it to stay in its bucolic state for foot traffic and non-vehicular traffic. So what I would propose is if we go ahead and approve the resolutions so that the applicant can go forward and apply for the Westchester County Health Department documentation that we've requested. But I do want to amend the resolution so that it does clarify that we want to preserve the status quo, the indeterminate nature of Gory Brook Road. But even though there's been all this discussion about improving the standards to street or driveway standards, really, we don't want vehicles on Gory Brook Road. So, Clinton, we want to figure out a way how to clarify the record so that we all know.
Sorry, I just wanted to say one thing. There's a big public.
Could you stand? Thank you.
Tara Rockefeller. There is a really important public purpose that no one should forget, which is that fire and ambulance, if there's an issue in the family properties, the preserve, state property, that's how they get in. And they would go down there, and it's happened before. And there are 2 locks, 2 keys, and so there's an ability to get somebody out of there quickly, and that's a fast way to do it.
And have you driven on?
Excuse me, Direct your comments to the chair, please.
I haven't driven on Gory Brook
Yeah.
Road, no.
I'm just asking my client
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
to say
Yeah.
what she signaled to me she had done so that the record's clear.
I just want the conversation going to the chair, that's all. Thank you.
Sorry, we don't want to interrupt, but I thought that's an important, when you talk about emergency, that's what I was hearing before, emergency.
I think it's just really important for you to understand that we've spent tens of thousands of dollars improving Gory Brook Road. And now we're faced with a situation where we're being punished for all the good that we've done. And I think that's something that's just fundamentally not right. That's all I want to say.
So, Mr. Smith, can you help us figure out how to clarify this? And have we been abundantly clear as to what we want to get in the public record? Or do you need more direction from us?
I think that there may still be disagreement between the board and Mr. Knoll on who can use Gory Brook Road. I think if you want to clarify it, you would amend the resolution that you would amend the preliminary resolution that you adopted last meeting by eliminating Note 7, which says that if Gory Brook Road is used, et cetera, the property owner will upgrade it to village standards. That seems to me to be causing the fundamental problem. That would leave Note 4 saying that a note should be placed on the plat delineating Gory Brook Road, or excuse me, describing the current status of Gory Brook Road. That leaves us in, quite frankly, the current circumstance. One problem, it's a fundamental problem, and if I'm restating the obvious, forgive me, but you want to clarify the rights of the village to Gory Brook Road. Mr. Knoll doesn't acknowledge, or you want to clarify the rights of the public to Gory Brook Road.
Correct.
Mr. Knoll doesn't want to acknowledge the rights of the public to Gory Brook Road. Somewhere, that's where you start. Somewhere we may be able to find language that fits, but so far we haven't.
Right. Basically, I think there's two fundamental issues. There are two precedents that have been set with regard to Gory Brook Road. One is non-vehicular traffic, which we want to preserve, but correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Knoll, you're saying that's at, the applicant's discretion and
For their own use, to get to their property, my clients have told me they've used Gory Brook Road, they've unlocked the chain. and
I'm just
driven-
talking about non-vehicular access right now.
talking, non-vehicular, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about vehicular.
Yep. So we want to preserve the walkers and
Could-
runners and
Could you
joggers,
give me just 1
but
second?
not the vehicular traffic. And we're on opposite sides of each of those issues between the board and the applicant. Why don't you use the microphone?
I just want to make another obvious comment to me, because we walk there, we use it all different ways. Carriages, you need to get out in emergency at one point. I see it as a road that has had cars on it, right? And then next to it is access, a piece of state, people-owned property that is property of the state of New York, which is directly parallel to it, which is also, we've taken some trees that have fallen off of there too, but in any case, it is always typically open and accessible with many points of access from the neighborhood. That's equally used. So, it's not as if to say, that you want to hold on to full and continual, full public use of Gory Brook is taking away access to the Rockefeller State Park Preserve from the people who live in that part of the town, is, I guess, maybe a point if people haven't been there and used the property extensively. Sean, I know you live in the neighborhood. People come through Douglas Park, people come through the cemetery. There are many points of access. And this particular section seems to be problematic because the village doesn't own it in full. And that's, I think, why it's complicated for everyone.
Right, thank you. So I think we have language for point 4 that we will make the amendment to the preliminary resolution, correct? We will adopt the language suggested by Mr. Null for point 4?
You can if you want to amend point 4, or you can leave point 4 as it is.
Stating that we will clarify the status quo.
Describing the status of Gory Brook Road, correct.
Okay,
I would welcome you using the language so we don't have this discussion next month if we get Department of Health sign off on it. If it seems like we're just kicking the can down the road.
yes, I agree. I would like clarity sooner versus deferring it to yet another planning board
I mean,
meeting.
if your intention is to amend the resolution in any event, I think it would be productive to address that point 4.
And I think the amendment, certainly, we would want to eliminate point 7, because I don't think anybody wants to improve it. What we maybe have the conflict about is we would like to not have vehicles on that other than on the extreme case for ambulance or some emergency access.
But it is now used by the family to get over Gory Brook Road to the Landrock property at times.
Well, the Leidens are saying it's not used, the
Well,
Rockefellers are saying it's used.
They're the Rockefellers are the
I
ones
can't
that are
gauge
using
it.
it. So
Right.
that the Leidens haven't seen them use it doesn't mean that there's an inconsistency here. My clients are not telling you something that's untrue.
Right. So when is it used versus the main driveway?
If you had a way in and a way out, sorry. If you had a way in or a way out, 2 different points, are you going to church or, are you going into town? We don't use it often at all, but I think the point is geographic, right? Geographic point of access. There are times that I'll go in if I want to, because we obviously don't have a house there yet, carry something extremely heavy, and maybe there's a limb down on one of the access roads to get closer, and we can go right up to the top of the hill that way. It's the language. It's from time to time, either emergencies or other appropriate use.
Yeah, if you can appreciate whatever we all agree to, it's then incumbent on village staff to then enforce. So
Yeah.
when we say incidental or time to time, it's not an absolute. So it makes it very difficult for our village employees to administer, and then after the fact, it's really hard to enforce and tell, I guess, Lot 3 at that point, you have to improve it to grade for street or driveway standards.
Well,
So
Sorry.
that's,
We understand that you don't want to improve to driveway or street standards, and we're not proposing to do it that way. We're proposing that it be maintained in the same way that it's been maintained at our clients' cost, certainly not village costs.
yes.
So that it can be used occasionally for motor vehicle access to that property. And we're actually limiting it further by saying to Lot 3.
Okay.
So, but
So we
don't
will
think it's,
include
with due
that
respect, we don't think
clarification.
it's appropriate to prohibit us from doing that. I don't see how, in any way, there's any record of anything unsafe or inappropriate that occurs by occasional use of that road.
Mr.
Two
Steinmetz?
things, Madam Chair, members of the board. If you're going to allow some degree of improvement, as Mr. Knoll just indicated,
I didn't say improvement.
Direct comments to the chair.
some kind of modification to the roadway, there ought to be limit, and he just indicated that there's no intention to pave it or improve it in that fashion, then put those restrictions in the resolution. Make it clear so that we don't leave this lack of clarity on what could or could not happen. Second thing, it's now an hour since Mr. Natarelli said it, but let's not forget, and point of information, the suggestion was made that you also include the obligation to offer an easement in favor of the village. If you're amending the resolution, that should be in here as well, an easement in favor of the village for future potential utility connection. My clients on the adjacent property would certainly provide the village with any kind of similar easement to allow you in the future, should you ever decide to install utilities of any kind. So if you
believe-
talked about it, it ought to be in your resolution.
Right, and I believe you agreed to that with the conditions.
For access to maintain,
Right,
not to put infrastructure in at this point.
okay.
Madam Chair, did you understand the distinction of what the two of us just said?
No.
Yeah, so Mr. Natarelli, I won't speak for him, I thought I heard him say for future installation of infrastructure, and that's what I was suggesting you do. That's the prudent thing to do, and it's in the ordinary course in many subdivisions of this nature. My clients certainly would provide the Village of Sleepy Hollow with an easement to allow you to install infrastructure in the future. And I think, Mr. Natarelli, that is what you indicated.
Can you read the language again, Mr. Natarelli?
The comment from my memo reads, "It is recommended that easement D for village water and sanitary sewer be extended on the subject property for the entire length of Gory Brook Road."
Okay. All right. Mr. Null,
Yes,
did you,
I've made my point, I think, clearly. Apart from what Mr. Steinmetz is trying to compel us to do, I think it's the board's decision. But I'm still not clear, if the board is saying to us, we can no longer use the road that we have a right over, and that in addition, you're going to compel us not just to loop the water main north at a cost of over $200,000, but now you're going to compel us to grant an easement at no cost to the village, so that in the future, it may extend the water main in the way that we asked you to extend it to begin with, and you said no. I don't feel there's a parity here. Not that there needs to be a parity, but I don't follow why you're restricting us from using our property the way we've been using it for decades, and then asking us to do something more for the village.
okay.
I mean, just to weigh in on my thoughts, listening to all of the conversation that's been had tonight and in previous nights, I don't think our intention is to restrict any current uses that are happening. Any conversation that's been had, I think, is in reflection of the proposed development to occur and the increased use that might come with that. But I think it's clear, as we've stated, what our intentions are for Gory Brook Road in terms of our preference is that we still have public access for non-vehicular use. So I don't know if there's to accomplish that, if it's about an easement access, potentially,
That's
if we went with
from
your
the
language
Leidens-
otherwise.
That would be over the Leidens property. It's not.
Correct, just for your portion, it sounded like they were amenable to that earlier tonight, they said so. And then,
I'll come back to you. I need to talk to my client about it. I'll come back to you for,
I'm just trying to
final
propose things
subdivision
I
at
think
that
might
time?
help us reach a resolution and move forward, because I think that's also, I just want to state, our intention is not to delay this project or your approval or your possibility to go to the county. And that's why our intention was to stand by our approval from last month, but clearly address any unclarity that is within it. And I
But
think,
you're adding conditions now that
No,
weren't.
I'm just.
If you're, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, my hope, though I'm new to this process, is that possibly this could happen between the preliminary and the final, because that's part of my understanding from last month was that it was just a preliminary approval. There was going to be a final approval, so there was going to be time to work out anything that we weren't quite all exactly on the same page about, and yet we're trying to get there. And I think, for the most part, we are saying the same things in different ways. Clearly, we're not 100% aligned, and that's why we have this difficulty reaching final resolution. So I guess there's a couple points. One is the non-vehicular access, and if we need to adopt your language or add to it in the future, but we could leave note number 4 for now, I think, as it had been written and approved last week, or last month. In regards to number 7, just to rehash what we've been talking about, if we took it away, and that's stating I'm not even suggest whether we amend that now or whether we do it at the final, that can be discussed further, but I say with the intention that things stay as they are, and as a board member, I guess my understanding is if you are going to have future increased use of that access, alternative access for lot number 3, when you come before us for a site plan approval, at that time, likely we would be talking about this again for improvements that would be required if that were to be the case. I think what we agree to is the current use continuing. If any more use occurs, that's why all this language started to come into play as to then that things would need to be addressed because it doesn't meet standards.
Yeah, my understanding, and maybe not correctly, but my understanding was the reason for note 7 was your concern that what if lot 3 used it more than incidentally? What if there was regular and frequent use of vehicles up and down? That's not what you want. And we understand that, and we're fully accepting of that. But to roll from that to not allowing lot 3 to use it for occasional access to the home that'll be built there or back out to town, I don't understand why that's necessary to impose.
So here's my proposal as far as how to move forward with this application and this preliminary subdivision is we approved language last month. I would suggest that I sign that so that we can advance the process because we do want you to develop lots 2 and 3 and don't want a further delay. But in terms of having a clearer path and clearer language between the preliminary and the final, it sounds like we have an opportunity to make amendments to the preliminary resolution, in which I would suggest that note 4, that language, instead of describing the current status, be more articulate and using the language that includes the verbiage about the indeterminate use. So that's my proposal for number 4. For number 7, I would suggest that we eliminate that altogether in the amendment. And then regarding James's recommendation as far as the easement for infrastructure for the village, to include that in the amendment to the preliminary resolution as well. Is that feasible, Mr. Smith?
I believe so. I believe so, yes.
Okay.
If you get a second to your motion.
Just for clarity, are you talking about amending the preliminary approval that we approved last month, or are you talking about changes you would make between the approved preliminary plat and the final?
It would be an amendment to the resolution.
to the resolution that was approved last month.
But you're talking about signing what we did approve, and are these changes or amendment happening post-signature or prior? Post.
So,
Does
sorry.
that make sense?
Is that feasible?
Madam Chair, I'm a little confused. If you were going to sign the resolution as is, so that we could go to county health, then what you're talking about would be conditions in the final approval. And Clinton, correct me if I'm misstating things, but if you sign the resolution, that's the resolution. And that's what would be filed. And I don't think you'd have jurisdiction to go back and amend that after signing it. So I'm fine with there being additional issues that we discuss with regard to final. But
I think, and I believe I heard only a part of it, in fact, I know I heard only a part of what you
I
said,
can repeat it if you want.
if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm saying that I believe the chair said the concept was she would sign the resolution as it was approved last month, and then amend the resolution between then and final. And I, with due respect, don't think that's what can be done.
I agree.
So you tell me the mechanics then
Okay.
of making it more clear and making it more consistent between preliminary and final.
You can't. So what you need to do is postpone signing the preliminary
Okay?
until it's the way you want it to be. Therefore, tonight, you can amend it if you get a second to your motion and sufficient votes to amend the resolution to do whatever you want it to do. And then tomorrow, I will go in and I will revise it and send it to Ms. Pelginski by email. Over the weekend, you can come in and sign it. And Mr. Null can get it on Monday.
Okay. And let's do that then.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, whereas last month, the amendments were to, it says delete note 4, which we did by saying it was, a note would be placed on the plat describing the current status. We're going to delete that. We are going to insert Mr. Null's language, ownership by Land Rock LLC of the underlying fee to the bed of Gory Brook Road, as shown on this subdivision plat, is not determinative of any right to use the roadbed. We're going to delete condition 7 in its entirety, and we're going to add a new condition 7, which will extend the easements, shown on the plat, the full length of Gory Brook Road within the boundaries of Land Rock.
Easement D for village water and sanitary sewer be extended on the subject property for the entire length of Gory Brook Road.
Within the Land Rock parcel.
Right. On the subject property.
I said extend easement D, not on the subject property, but extend easement D the entire length of Gory Brook Road within the boundaries of Land Rock.
It says it's the same sentence with different words, right?
Yes, yes. All right. That's your motion?
Correct.
Okay, do you have a second?
Do I have a second?
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Any opposition?
Abstention? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. We look forward to coming back and having further discussions. Have a good night.
Likewise, have a good night.
Yeah. Madam Chair, you have a public hearing open.
Oh. Can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
No, don't.
Oh, do
close
I
it.
just,
You have to ask
what?
Public, right? Is anybody else in the public?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you need to see if anybody else here
Oh.
has any comments, and then you can either close it or adjourn it. I would suggest you adjourn it.
yes. Does anyone else have any more comments? Okay.
Motion to adjourn until our next meeting in November, whatever the date may be.
We don't have a date yet, right? Because we don't know when we'll get the further documentation and endorsements, so we'll just adjourn open-ended? Right.
Okay, so
With no
Motion
date, we just motion to
to
adjourn.
adjourn.
I think
For a
to
future
your
date.
next meeting in
Sure.
November, I think with
Next
due
meeting.
respect, you need to adjourn to a date certain for it to be meaningful.
Correct.
So what date is it?
What is the date?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any reason it wouldn't be the 21st?
Yeah. Thanksgiving's not till the 28th, so,
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Okay,
Until
November 21st.
21st.
do I get a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition or abstention? Okay,
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you. The Phase 1 Edge on Hudson Riverfront Development amended site plan approval is being deferred to November 21st as well. So Jonathan Villani, thank you for your patience.
We should have probably said that at the beginning of the meeting, because there's somebody that's been sitting here.
I thought we said that, yeah.
Good evening. Jonathan Villani with Annunziata Villani Design Consultants with Hudson Engineering. This is Ubato, represents Hudson Engineering. We are in front of you to discuss, again, a proposed development on 30 Andrews Lane of 9 units. We've made some modifications and discussions with the village for a proposed 2-building layout and a new driveway with proper circulation for emergency vehicles.
Hi, my name is Albeda from Hudson Engineering. Just wanted to show you a quick look. This is what we had before the board previously. The board was not obviously in favor of this. Compare this area with the 3 buildings and impervious coverage on the site. Barely any pervious surfaces left compared to, proposed condition where we have a 5-unit building, 4-unit building with 1 internal spot, 1 external spot for each unit, and I guess limited access, if you will, strictly limited to allowing a fire truck to access the site, get in and out of the site, and also for all the parked vehicles to get in and out. We're basically looking for any comments, recommendations of the board to see if this is a site plan you'd be willing to go forward with, so we can go more in depth and in detail as far as the design.
Comments?
I can say I appreciate there's aspects I appreciate in terms of more open space, though I think it could be looked at further as to how that open space can be utilized and benefit the future residents better. There's other things, though, that I feel like necessarily aren't improvements upon the previous design. And one specifically is now the relationship or the facade that's going to be facing Andrews Lane. I definitely preferred before the way you had it facing, so that there were front yards similar and more in character with the adjacent properties on the street. And now that you've turned it, you've got a side elevation with a false entry that I feel like is unfortunate, or I'm hoping that can be approved upon or looked at further. And then I had a question about your floor plan, and I'm guessing part of it is in relation to trying to keep the parking within the code requirement to not need to ask for variances. Though I think potentially the bedroom levels of the floor plan aren't the best use of the space, or aren't, I've got, not to go into specific comments about it, but yeah, I think the first two floor plans, I don't have too many comments about, especially the one with the open plan, the kitchen, dining room, living room, that all seems very logical. It's more the latter two. And even the balcony that you're proposing, that it's facing just the driveway, seems, and is off of the hallway. I would hope that could be positioned differently, both in what it's looking at externally, but also as to what it's adjacent to on the inside of the building. Those are just some preliminary comments from looking at what you submitted to us that I had noted to say tonight. But I guess the last thing I did also, if you don't probably have I appreciate that you brought back the plan that we had seen last time, so we can see kind of where we were at and where we're now. Do you have any of the elevations or renderings of what it had been prior?
No, I didn't print
Okay.
those.
Because
This is such a drastic difference.
that's the thing. Yeah, I was gonna say I feel like you really departed, and but the previous design actually seemed more in character with the neighborhood than your current design.
We're definitely open to suggestions as far as the design is concerned. What's been a obstacle for this particular site is the orientation of the buildings.
Right.
Architecturally, there's things we can work out, but the orientation of the buildings, we've went through several iterations of this property. And to be able to satisfy all the elements as far as site design is concerned, we came up with this configuration. So to address the facade on there is things we can architecturally do to whether we switch that last building to face Andrews Lane and fix the floor plans. At this point, the building configuration's been the biggest obstacle. So if we have that building configuration, the architecturals may fall into place a little bit more in line with what you're looking for.
Just out of curiosity, the distance that you have from the side setback to the unit in the backyard, or
This one?
the other side,
This one?
nope, the
Right there.
yes, the one exactly
Right
there.
here? Yes.
Is it possible that you could, for example, make that block of buildings have 5 units, and then the front one could have 4 and be rotated, or no?
No, the 5 here, I couldn't possibly get the width. I'm the tightest width I could be for the townhouse.
Okay.
And to put another unit along here, we'd have to go along this 10-foot setback on that side.
So, I guess that answers that question.
Before we, like really get started, is there any major variances you're gonna
No,
get?
it's in total compliance.
No variances at
No,
all?
the only extreme situation here is the village allowing us to have a emergency vehicle pass through the site and onto the parking lot. Because
Right.
that's where the building configuration comes into play, because we could not put a full turning radius of the fire truck inside the property.
The village board has okayed this to go through the municipal parking lot?
We've had discussions, as
Oh.
far as official approval, we've had discussions about this particular configuration where the truck
Right.
comes through the site, yes.
I think, Sean, you also had a comment earlier about there could be a different way to configure the first building in order to make it more appealing to the street view.
Yeah, it's kind of along the lines that Kirsten was mentioning, if you could squeeze the other unit in the back and then rotate the front one.
That's, just because it's been such, it's been such a long road, this is a 10-foot back on this 10-foot side setback. This is a 5-foot. We can
No,
We
but
can
you have enough
We'd still have
room
this issue where this one trims out.
remaining to put 5 units across the back.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, how much room do you have left?
I'll have to take a look at
That would just,
and help.
it would help with the front building then.
Yeah, and then switch the configuration of the front building.
And then, if in fact you can't, and you're gonna go with this scenario, did you consider staggering the buildings opposite that you have here so that the backyards were a little more private from the street? So reverse the stagger that you have?
So this one, and then,
Yeah, does that
we can,
make any sense?
no, it makes 100% sense. The biggest, I think, the facade along Andrews Lane, whatever's gonna make this facade on Andrews Lane look more appealing, making more private yards is absolutely an option. I think as long as we're going in the right direction where these configuration and something is appealing to, this is our biggest hurdle, right? Being able, this configuration and bringing the truck through the site this way. How we address the building on Andrews Lane is definitely something we can work on.
Just, have you looked at if you were to put the front building, let's say, facing Andrews Lane again, with less units if needed, and put a longer, instead of the back building being oriented towards the back lot line, if it was the one that was rotated and facing the side yard, to be able to be longer, does that work or not?
Well, I think there's so many items that we have to address as far as open space, the yards, the front yards, the walkways out to Andrews Lane. It's something we can explore, but I think we've gone down that road before where we've had the buildings facing Andrews Lane.
Do you understand
I mean,
the question I had? It's kind of,
it does open the options that we've gone from 12 to 11 now to 9 units.
I definitely appreciate that you have more flexibility now.
I could explore the orientation of the building.
Yeah, I was just picturing like what I'm seeing, here with its side facing Andrews. If it was slid back and its side was facing the back, and this other one was, say rotated and facing the front, would you be able to still get the driveway in the way you need to and access to the garages? That I don't know.
Well, obviously we'd have to fit it within this confine, which would
Exactly.
definitely have us cause us to put a building in the back.
Yeah,
Take
yeah.
one of these units off.
correct.
place it here,
Changing the
then
quantity of what's here and there. Exactly. Still
How
maintaining the
high?
9.
How high is the building now?
39 feet.
So that's code, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
And just as a point of reference, what's the height of the existing structure? Because I know you did a lot of stuff in the past.
We did a study, yes. The properties in the back are roughly 4 to 5 feet above the elevation of this property. So the existing building, I think, was 34 feet. We're making it 40, but in essence, relative to the buildings in the back,
The top of the roof would be similar.
It's almost the same.
I'd like to make a few comments on the landscape design as laid out in this preliminary drawing. I appreciate the greater amount of open space that this format allows for. I understand, well, I guess in keeping with the conversation of the general streetscape experience on 30 Andrews Lane, something that is very characteristic of the broader neighborhood are front porches, a sense of spilling out into the sidewalk experience. I think it's also important with this location to consider the location of a significant public asset, which is the park almost directly across the street. And so it's really seeing this community of residents as being in physical, this building being in kind of physical dialogue with that open space, I think is important. Along those lines, I do feel that the open spaces within this property, not the private lawns, but the other larger spaces could have consideration for how they might be used as sort of a community space for the residents at large. This is not this is not like a strip mall suburban plot where you're dropping people in and you're driving in and parking and then going into your cubby and then getting back in your car and leaving. This is a very pedestrian oriented place in our village, and appreciating that position within the village, I feel, is very important, and creating a sense of community spaces within this subdivision can be done through the organization of plants, and there's lots of ways to create inviting spaces to spend time picnicking outside of your little
Seating areas.
yeah, outside of your particular townhouse lawn, but to invite, neighborhoodly, spirit within this residential community.
So to make the open space more communal versus tiny,
Right,
you know,
instead of,
individual
right now,
lots.
your layout on Andrews Lane it's a row of spruce that are basically a visual screen of a large building. Like, okay, don't look behind, we just want to make it look, kind of go away. And really, I think it would be nice to have this be seen as an integral part of the neighborhood and have that presentation of, this is a part of our community, we live here, we welcome you. Do you understand what I'm saying? So we don't really want you to hide your building. Your building's going to be there. We want you to sort of I don't know, display it and be a part of the community.
So we're happy that you're back before the planning board. There's been some time that's lapsed, and clearly you've taken a lot of our comments to heart, and I see that you've worked really hard to come up with a new design. So I appreciate you sharing your preliminary thoughts with us, and I think there's a lot more work to
Absolutely. And we will take all your comments and address them.
I do have one last comment. So another thing I think is important to consider at this early stage is the potential for, or just looking at our energy landscape right now, and the fact that there are a lot of people that are interested in rooftop solar, looking at roof lines so that they might be compatible for that should the owners of these properties choose to do that, just designing it in a way that might be to enhance that possibility, rather than designing in a way that that isn't an option. Also, I know there are geothermal is something that is in discussion. I don't know if that's something that might be considered on this property.
Have you, in fact, given some thought to sustainable energy? Because it's a marketing point in terms of,
Well, obviously, have to
lowering
discuss it.
operating
And
costs, right?
discuss it with my client, discuss it with part of his,
Mhm.
these are intended to be sold. As part of construction costs, or offering that to the potential buyers, or making it part of the initial construction.
Right. But it lowers the, if you can get to a net zero, that makes it attractive
We
in
can
terms
definitely
of
explore the
ongoing.
options,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Were these all three-bedroom? I forget.
Two. They're all 2 bedrooms.
I know that last time we spent a lot of time talking about garbage truck access, where people put their garbage pails. It looks like we have a lot more opportunities to not have to put it in front of their doors, or maybe have something located in one area. Did you guys?
Well, they're gonna keep garbage in their particular unit and then drag it out when it's to be. We could designate an area of where they all bring their garbage to be picked up.
Okay, it looks like we have more options now.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the 9 units is opening up a whole bunch of doors.
So you park, is it 2 cars in there?
Yes, one inside.
One inside and two out?
So that's the site plan. One inside, one out for each unit.
Oh,
So it equals 18 units, which is what's required. Okay. So we'll go back and address.
If parking wasn't an issue, dare I ask the question, would you be looking to have more bedrooms?
I don't think it's a possibility.
Okay.
The
I just
size
wondered
of the- we're
market-wise,
very
like
limited
what
with
the
our
market's.
development coverage.
Yeah.
So I don't want to keep adding another story and adding a third bedroom. And our development
Yeah,
coverage is
no.
limiting it to 2 bedrooms.
Okay. That's why I said if,
1,600 square feet, the units are 1,600 square feet
Yeah.
without the garage. So
it's just
space.
not that much space to.
there's no, obviously not, no place for an extra place to park a couple extra cars in that lot. Because then, when you only have 2 spots for your,
Obviously, and therein lies we take away open space if we do that. I take away more open space. I can
but
carve
you know
out
what?
more spaces.
We talked about this when you were there the last
Yeah.
time, because Andrews Lane, you know the park.
We spent
You know, what
3
happens
months.
when it happens when your
discussing.
mother-in-law comes over, your father, there's no place to park then.
Yeah,
I hate this sound so, because we brought this up the last time, but
I'm sure it's going to be an issue when we open a public hearing.
parking's bad. And, you know, there's no sense of hiding from it.
The only, I mean, again, though,
And,
we'd love to.
don't get me wrong, what you did, come from 12 down to 9, it's really great. But that's the big problem.
I just don't, I think it's a futile attempt. If we add a couple more spots, 2 or 3 spots, we're still gonna get we're in total compliance with the parking. Do we even address that? And when it's much more of an issue than just adding a couple extra spots on our property. From the discussion with the public hearing, it seems to be a bigger issue than just my property. If I'm in compliance, I don't know what else to do for, as far as the only thing that I can think of that might come up, that because of the fire truck access on Andrews Lane to the property, we haven't finalized yet, but there might be 2 spaces taken away because of it next to the driveway, right? So we might want to add those 2 so it doesn't become an issue on the property. 2 more additional spots, because we might be taking on Andrews Lane, taking away 2 spots. Because of the turning radius of the
The
truck.
last time we were here,
Yes.
that's what we talked about. that
Yes.
We were gonna lose them spots for the truck. just
So
to
maybe
get in.
we'll take a look at putting 2 extra spots on the site, just so there won't be a point of contention with taking those 2 spots off.
And then just, when you open up the municipal parking lot so you can get out, you're gonna take 2 more spots.
No. No.
Why?
I don't think so. Right, you weren't gonna remove any spots.
No.
No, they're coming out to the driveway.
They're coming out into the driveway.
Should be okay.
Yeah, we looked into it, I think. I believe I've talked to Mike.
One last thought about the
Yes.
public space and thinking of alternatives to cars, and because we are in a very this isn't a walkable neighborhood. You don't have any like common bike storage or parking spots in your green areas that I think could be a welcomed asset to have.
Sure, 100%. But we're trying to work, we're gonna fine tune everything. We just wanna make sure.
Just throwing out ideas as I
Because
have.
the two biggest things were building configuration and because nothing was gonna go if we couldn't get the fire truck for the site.
Right.
Right.
So that was a big hurdle we had to come across.
Yeah, coverage and,
Yes, and development and amount of units. So we reduced the units, reduced the coverage, got the truck through the site, and now we can start dealing with the details, which is nice to hear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry to ask one question, because my knowledge of that lot is not that great, but is along the property line the driveway of the parking lot, or are there spots along your property line?
There's a driveway on that side.
In the Durso lot,
Yeah,
L Street lot,
right.
there's a driveway.
And is it not wide enough for the fire truck to go through there? Should they have a need to get to the buildings that are on this site?
Yeah, the truck can get in there.
Yeah, I guess that's my just not to I appreciate all that you have done and the conversations that you've had with the our fire station. But that thought has been in my mind. Do they even need to get into the actual site if they can be right adjacent to
Really gonna be
you?
more to get out.
Yeah.
They can't turn around.
Most likely.
You want them backing up out of the site, right?
Most likely they would pull in front on Andrews Lane for the front building and pulling the driveway for the back building.
But I guess I'm saying, could they be pulling into the adjacent lot
They could
and fighting the
also-
fire from there and
They will fight the fire wherever.
from all sides, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And so they can, the answer is yes, they can get in the lot if they need to.
But one of the discussions was, correct me if I'm wrong, is the boom of the truck getting to this building and then circling to getting to this building and not just coming home trying to get it from here.
So-
In case there was any obstructions in the parking lot.
There's a lot of opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah, this allows us to handle the fire on site.
Right, and that's why you have that front building kind of
Yes,
tilted, right?
correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
And, yeah, so you'll.
We will make revisions and resubmit.
Right, and I encourage you to work closely with Sean and the building department
will.
to
I
fine
think
tune it.
As long as, there's a general positive traction now, we can take it forward. I
Okay,
appreciate it.
great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last is the minutes from September 18th. Do I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes as submitted by Pamela.
Can I get a second?
Second and.
All approve?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion to adjourn the meeting?
Can I get a
Or is
second?
that-
All in favor of adjourning the meeting?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.